being accountable or being obedient is one of the core skills that every Christian anywhere in discipleship has to learn. Now we'll pick up again with why America is a difficult place to be a disciple, which is answering the question, why is accountability a dumb idea and obedience an evil idea in American thinking? I want to underscore how discipleship requires accountability, the difference between accountability and obedience, and I'm going to close, frankly, on a downer. And the downer is I'm going to give you some stories of people who thought, oh, I can do it myself. So I've talked earlier about the myth of autonomy. I got this. I don't need anybody else. Well, along with that, these four factors lead us to think that accountability and obedience are just bad ideas. One of them is consumerism. Autonomy breeds consumerism. Okay, if I'm a self-contained entity, well, it is me that is the judge of everything. I am the definition of truth and right and wrong. And therefore, I determine my own needs. I determine how to fulfill them. And I know this is true because I can go to Amazon's site and I can buy anything in the world. And Amazon wants to tell me that this is good. They reinforce this because it's in their interest for me to think that my happiness is the highest good in the world. Because if I think my happiness is the highest good in the world, then Amazon can tell me that happiness will come when I buy this and that and the other thing. When I subscribe to this service. When I purchase this agreement that somebody comes and cleans up my house and somebody sends me food that I just throw in the microwave and throw on the table. I never want to deny my desires. They don't want me to deny my desires because if I deny my desires, I hit their bottom line. They don't want me to say, I can't afford this. They want to tell me, oh, you still have money in the credit line on your credit card. Can you ever pay it back? Not my problem. So maybe buying that extra cup of Starbucks makes me happy. I don't need the Starbucks. I look down at my gut and I think, I don't need the calories. But I like the taste. Makes me feel good. Makes me say, I can afford one of these. Now, maybe there's a starving kid somewhere that would benefit an awful lot more from that $5 than I do. But he's in some godforsaken hole across the world. I don't care about him. I don't want to care about him. I don't need to care about him. I want my Starbucks. And that's all because I'm king. I'm God. Other people? Now, once you've gotten to this point, independence and consumerism help you to understand that you're entitled to all of this. You're an American. You're not from some third world country. You're an American. You're entitled to all this. This prosperity is your God-given birthright. You deserve to be happy, and again, it's all about making me feel good. And as long as I feel good, I can rationalize anybody else's pain. And at that point, if I'm that happy and I'm that satisfied, what do I need this God myth for? Only primitive people need that when they're trying to figure out how they're going to keep from starving. And if that wasn't enough, we've now added to this the final fulfillment of the serpent's challenge to humanity in the Garden of Eden. Now you're told that all the knowledge in the world literally fits in the palm of your hand. And so since all the knowledge of the world lives in this box, all I have to do is search for what I want. And as long as I search for what I want, I can choose whatever out there happens to fit with what I want to believe. This is an Android. But an apple with a bite, a bitten apple. Exactly. And yeah, well, the reality is, this is one of those kind of, they probably had no idea what they were saying, but it's true. Now, I'm not saying there's a conspiracy here.
Oh no, I have
Yeah,
another.
yeah, sure, yeah.
Samsung's little logo is like this little like oval shaped thing like this, right? No, it's cricket. But you put the Samsung is like an oval shaped like that. You put it right into the apple, it's perfectly makes it full apple.
Oh. Yeah. So Steve Jobs was an irreverent, unbelieving fellow. But you realize now with the ubiquity, with the everywhere present character of the internet, the web, search engines, and now AI, every possible idea in the world seems available to you. So now you get to create your own custom reality. You can live in whatever world you want to live in, because internet search algorithms will figure out what you like to see, and they will start to feed you what they're learning you like to see. And if you've done enough searches over enough time, they know that if you have already believed this and this and this and this, then these are the things that are part of that package. And any evidence that says, oh, those things are not right, well, that evidence is over here and will never appear in your searches. Except for once in a while, something that's obnoxiously stated from that position will appear in your search results. Why? Because they know that the only thing that will keep you hooked more than telling you what you want to hear is to tick you off. And when they tick you off, that means you go back to all of the rest of the same stuff you want to hear, and you go and read more of the why this is right, and you're addicted to that screen. You will be like gods, knowing good and evil. And in addition to you being omniscient and creating your own custom reality, you can also create your own custom social reality. You know, it used to be that if you had real people that you were associated with, you'd have to actually live with somebody who maybe doesn't think exactly like you do. Maybe they don't exactly look like you. Maybe they voted for somebody different than you did. Well, you had to live with those people because they lived next door to you, or you worked with them. Well, you create a virtual community online, there's no such limits. If there are 25 people in the world who believe that the Earth orbits around the moon, those 25 people can get together online and they can form their lunar-centric universe society, and they can create a reality in which they're the only real people on Earth. Because I don't have to interact with anybody other than the ones I want to interact with, and I don't need to fit in with these people who don't believe what the 25 of us believe. I'm free, I'm independent, I'm the king, all my wants should be met, I should be happy, I have access to everything, I know everything. But this is not what the Bible tells us. You're not free and independent. What you're doing is you're serving the world. The only one who's truly free is God. And remember, God is king, not you. The yardstick of what is right and wrong is God, not my feelings, not my desires. And for Christian disciples, you're not entitled to happiness. You're entitled to joy. You're entitled to be content in the place that God has placed you. But you are still called to take up your cross and follow Him. And you do that in a world which is hostile to you, which means there are times you will be unhappy. But remember, Paul and Silas, who are in a house which is owned by a jailer, they are chained up so they don't get away. It is midnight. They were just in the central square. They have just been beaten with rods. So they've gotten like 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch sticks. And somebody's whipped their back with them. And all contrary to the law, because you can't do this to a Roman citizen. But they never bothered to ask. Yeah, this was Philippi. So I remember where they would have had to have been let out. They're in jail after being tortured. They're singing at night because they have joy that they are doing what God wants them to do, even though they were unhappy and uncomfortable with the circumstances. And when it comes to knowing good and evil, knowing everything, how many things are any of us really an expert at? How many things are there in the world that somebody says, oh, well, I believe something about this, and you realize that this requires some knowledge of physics, chemistry, biochemistry, medicine, physiology. Well, I never studied any of those in school. Okay, so why is it now that somebody who has studied those things tells you something, and you go, And when it comes to fellowship and community, real communities aren't defined purely by everybody toes the line on this. They're defined by people who genuinely are concerned about each other and love each other and recognize that, we're not all identical. And that is not found in some chat community online. It's found in person with real disciples who share the same passion for Jesus Christ that you do. Now, in this respect, the ancient world was better than the modern world, because everybody in the ancient world lived in a collective society. You see, in the ancient world, everybody was related to somebody else by marriage, by family, or by social structure. So everybody is accountable to somebody along the line. I mean, until you get up to being the emperor, everybody's accountable to somebody else. So there's somebody in the world that has the right to look at you and say, man, you're getting off the rails. Now, in America, for somebody to say you're getting off the rails, them's fighting words. Because we don't allow anybody in close enough, because we're so blooming insecure, even though we pretend we're so independent. This extended family, patronage, employment, this all gives people the opportunity to understand what accountability is. And for this reason, nobody in the ancient or medieval world thought that you could be a lone wolf Christian. Now, Jesus and Paul fit naturally into that world. When they talk about discipleship and they talk about community, they don't have to spend a lot of time elaborating and proving this, because this was as obvious to these people as night and day. I mean, they could take for granted that everybody knew that you were in some kind of relationship to people. So somebody like me who's trying to teach discipleship has to harp on this, because I don't have the cultural helpers to get this across. There was a time in America where there was a social stigma, say, about divorce. So when a Christian preacher said, no, you really shouldn't divorce your spouse, well, I didn't have to scream and yell that, because everybody knew that if you got divorced, there was this big scarlet D on the side of your shirt here. And everybody knew you had the mark. Hey, that's the person that got divorced. Well, now, nothing generates shame. So at that point, the church has to say, not just don't get divorced, but don't go after hookups on Tinder. Don't have sex before marriage. When you get married, don't cheat on your spouse. And don't take another spouse, even if your spouse doesn't mind. And along the way, too, don't get divorced. Now, so we have to fill out a lot of stuff because society is not doing us any favors here. Now, for this reason, we have to look at the relatively small number of places where this is underscored in Scripture. And you can see this from the fact that if you trace the plan of God back to Genesis 12, to the call of Abraham, everything in the plan of God revolves around family. It revolves around connection and community. It's not that Abraham is called to be an individual follower of Yahweh. Abraham is called to be the founder of a great nation. Christ did not call a bunch of individuals to pray a sinner's prayer. Now, I don't object people. I encourage people to pray to ask God to forgive their sins and accept them into His kingdom. But this is not individuals. God didn't call an individual or a collection of individuals. He called a community. He called a kingdom into existence, and that kingdom shows itself in individual little communities we call churches or fellowships or whatever you want to call them. And that first church started with the 3,000 converts in the book of Acts. And when those people met together, they met together every day in the temple courts, and they broke bread regularly in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts. So these people didn't just go to a Billy Graham crusade and turn in a conversion card and then go off on their merry way. These people bought into an extended family. And this is why throughout the letters of the New Testament and off into later books in early Christianity, people called each other brother and sister because we're part of the family of God, not just the collection of Christian individuals. The only real example of individual Christians in all of church history are a number of individual monastics in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th centuries. These are outliers. And these are people who are, frankly, just so dedicated to following God that they just want to be alone with God. Whether that's right or wrong, maybe some people are called to that. I'm not God. I can't say that this was right or wrong. But other than that, the vast majority of monastic movements are communal. You may spend a lot of your day alone, but you're still in a community. There's responsibility. Somebody is your spiritual mentor, and you answer to them, and you answer to the discipline of the community. So I cannot emphasize enough how dangerous it is to try to go it alone. Lone sheep are easy prey for wolves. It's true biologically and it's true spiritually. Now let me differentiate between accountability and obedience because it's relevant to the situation you're in life. Accountability is where we give somebody the right to speak truth into our life. Now, what we agree in return is to listen to their advice and learn from their advice. Now, when I say learn from their advice, I mean that I have the right to say, well, yeah, that's mostly true. I mostly agree with you. I'm going to do these couple things which you suggest. I think these other things are kind of out there, and those aren't for me. In the case of obedience, you're saying, look, the last time I was on my own, the decisions I made were so horrible that you can't trust me with the keys to my life. Okay? So instead of me driving my car around, you take the keys and you drive me whenever and however you think I need to be driven. And I am giving up the right to take the keys back. Now, I can question your advice to me. I can say, do I really need to wash the dishes tonight? But I only reserve the right to question why that's the case and tell you why I think it shouldn't be. But at the end of the day, if he says, look, you had a bad day, you need to chill out, and the best way for you to do that is to be alone at that sink, thinking about how your day went. So, wash the dishes. And then you say, yes, sir. Now, let me take these in reverse order. So I've already alluded to when obedience is necessary. And that's basically when making your own decisions can be catastrophic. Now, this applies to people who've made really terrible decisions about their own life with substance abuse. But, Leon will tell you that this is also true of somebody going into battle. Because you can't afford to make your own decisions when there's somebody else on the other side of that ridge trying to kill you. Your best chance to stay alive is to listen to the commander and do exactly what the commander says, because if the commander is any kind of human being, has any kind of relationship with you, he does not want to turn you into cannon fodder. He does not have some desire to kill you. Okay? He is not King David with Uriah trying to cover for his own sin. He is somebody who needs to achieve an objective and wants to do it with the least possible loss of life or injury to the soldiers that he's responsible for. Because if he's any kind of human being and you die in the action, he's going to carry that burden for the rest of his life. So it's catastrophic to say, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. Or, yeah, I'll do that, Sarge. And you get part of the way and go, no, I'm going to go back behind the lines. And now somebody's up in front, they're relying on your covering fire, they have no covering fire, and fill in the blank. Monastics had some very astute advice for dealing with this kind of obedience, because this was the kind of obedience that was required in a monastery. And over decades or a couple of centuries, they had a lot of experience with a lot of people who had to be obedient to somebody. And trust me, they knew, I could give you the chapter and verse, they knew that not every person that was a spiritual mentor was a good one. Not every monastic leader was a genuinely godly, humble person. Some of them were bad apples. And so they told people, before you commit yourself to somebody, check them out. If you're going to go to a program and you're going to say, hey, I'm going to commit myself to be here, I need to know who these people are. Now, either I need to investigate them myself, Or I need to go to somebody I know and trust, somebody whose judgment I know is sound, and say, hey, look, I got to go somewhere. Where can I go? So I know some of you have been in this situation, and somebody that you knew and trusted said, Huntersfield would be a good place for you. Okay, well, that's great. So you do your due diligence however you're going to do it before you come. But once you come, you come. And once you agree to get in, you need to trust the people here enough to know that they have your best interests at heart. Because the biggest temptation that you face in a program where you're trying to be obedient is there's this little voice on the side of your shoulder saying, bail, bail, it's tough, bail. When that happens, you have to ask yourself, what happened the last time I had the keys to my life? What kind of decisions did I make? What kind of decisions did I make the last time I was unhappy with something and said, oh, I need to bail? Well, if I need to deal with my unhappiness, sometimes it's far better to just endure the difficulty, because you may find out that what you thought was catastrophic isn't catastrophic, it's just a bump in the road. And the whole reason you follow this obedience route is not to be a servant or slave for your entire life. The point of this is to learn to be able to make the right decisions so that when you think, you know, I'm ready to leave, I think. Charlie, what do you think? Give it another couple weeks. Okay. Charlie, I think I'm ready to go. Yeah, you know, I think you're right. I think you've made good decisions. You've been here long enough. I've seen the change in your character. So yeah, okay, you're now ready to go from obedience back to accountability. And when it comes to accountability, we need to be open to correction at every level of our life. Now, that accountability sometimes means we discern the advice people give us. Sometimes the advice is on target. But sometimes they point to something, but they don't really understand the full nature of where we're coming from. And so they've misunderstood what the issue is. I mean, they've seen something that's actually needs to be dealt with, but maybe their advice on how to correct it isn't right. And there are some times where people just see things because that's their experience and not yours. Because they're just reflecting their own needs or projecting their ideas on you. Any of those things can happen. So you have to be discerning. I know when I was a professor, there were any number of times I got criticisms on a student assessment form, feedback form. Now, when I was really young and really insecure, I took all of those personally because I thought, well, this can't be right. Well, somebody older and wiser than me sat me down, and I began to realize that everything they observed had some reality, some truth to the observation. Now, that didn't mean that I needed to do what the student thought I needed to do. He's too hard. Well, this is just a hard subject. I mean, I can't make the Greek language easy. I mean, it is what it is. If you want to be able to read the New Testament in Greek, it's painful. I mean, it costs you time, effort, and a real investment in discipline to memorize and be diligent in hitting it every day. But I can certainly try to simplify. I can certainly ask myself, do I need to teach them this? Do I need to teach them that? If something I say is confusing, I need to go back to my notes. I need to ask myself, well, where did they get confused? Well, why were they confused? Well, maybe they were just sleepy that day, and okay, that's not on me. But it is on me if I said something which assumed that you knew this, and you knew this, and you knew this, and not everybody knows this and this and this, okay? So if I'm going to make this point, I got to start by saying, well, this is the case, this is the case. And so here, this comes out of that. Oh, okay, now I get it. I got to be sure that you and I are on the same page when I start. I can't start halfway through the page and expect you to catch up to me. And that's a problem with anybody who knows a lot about their subject or has a lot of skill in an area. And it's true from the most esoteric knowledge to the most practical, concrete skills. You got to start from the beginning and go systematically through the whole process. So I have to discern what the criticism is and how I address it. And this is the way you have to be accountable to other people. Now, you cannot be accountable to everyone. And the reason you can't be accountable to everybody is because accountability requires a level of intimacy, trust, and commitment that you can't have with 500 people. You could have this with a half a dozen, maybe a dozen people, but not much more. So you need to restrict this and place most of your value on the input that comes from the people that are closest to you, that you have this kind of relationship with, that you can go back and forth with. Now, when you are accountable in a Christian community, you're accountable at different levels. There's a sense in which you're accountable to the pastor and the congregation because you are committing yourself to being there most Sundays. And you need to discern when you're there, is the pastor preaching to the person behind me? Or is the pastor really preaching to me? Is this message directed at me? Now, trust me, the pastor doesn't know what your day-to-day struggle is. But the Holy Spirit knows what your struggles are. And there are any number of times that a pastor will meet somebody from the congregation and they'll be told, you said this in your message. Well, I just had da-da-da-da-da-da. And the pastor just goes, not my doing. Because it's not his. It's not hers. God is at work in ways that we can't imagine. Most of your accountability needs to come in some kind of small group. Now, whether that's in a Sunday school, a house group, a Bible study, you need something smaller than a congregation to actually be able to speak truth into your life. And how effective that is all depends on this one question I have in this bullet point under this point. Am I there to have a good time, or am I there to find out how I can become more like Jesus? Now, what you really need, what I really need, what everybody really needs, is some kind of mentoring. And that means a few people or a single mentor. This was one of the worst decisions Protestants made in the Protestant Reformation. Because by saying that every believer is a priest, they've spoken something that is true only as far as it goes. Because you see, if a person is their own priest, that merely means that they can confess their sins directly to God. But if you studied the history of,
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
if you are your own priest, you can confess your own sins to God. And you can hear God forgive you for your own sins. So you don't need a priest to intercede for you. Fine, true. But if you knew anything about the church structure of Catholicism or Orthodoxy, you know that no priest is a lone wolf. Every priest is responsible to an archdeacon or to a bishop or to an archbishop. Somewhere along the way, they are responsible to somebody else. Just because you are your own priest does not mean you are your own bishop. And so every one of those people in a traditional church structure is somehow under the spiritual authority of some other, hopefully older and wiser person who is their mentor. And when Protestants flushed that kind of structure, they lost something very important. Because now we have no tradition of spiritually directing people, and any number of us in the church have been trying to recover this and reinstate it in Protestant churches, but it's slow going because it's a tough sell. But it's in these kinds of places that you can actually really let your hair down. You can really be honest and say, I am struggling. You know, I was reflecting here for a moment in Leon's life when he is in an army office in England and some Christian in his command comes into his office and is honest enough to say, I'm about to bag it. I'm about to flush this Christianity stuff. Can you stand with me? Now, thank God he had the sensitivity to the leading of the Holy Spirit to know to go to him and be mentored. But how often are we in a situation where we can actually say, look, I need to be mentored. I need to be able to let my hair down and say, look, I doubt this, I question this, I don't understand this, I'm really at the end of my rope, I need somebody to guide me. And we need, in our churches, to do more of this. And a promising avenue to restoring some of this is some of you who have been in programs like this, and you know what it's like to be mentored, and I'm sure God is calling people to go out and do that kind of mentoring among men. I mean, it's very hard for a man to mentor a woman. It's never been a terribly good idea. Because it's just not good to be this intimate with a woman. Very little good comes out of it. But we need more of this in the church because we can't have the kind of failings that we've continued to have. I promised to leave you on a downer, so here's the downer. The price of going our own way is really steep. I could bore you and discourage you with a whole bunch of examples. I'm going to limit myself to the traditional three. Two of these examples come from the ancient desert of Egypt. One of them comes from the modern world, in which I have some tangential understanding of this particular epic fail. You see, the longer I go my own way, and the more successful I am, the more I convince myself I really don't need anybody else. And what that leads to is the eighth or last of the 8 deadly thoughts, or deadly sins, or core diseases of the soul, which is pride. Pride puts me in the place of God. That pride leads inevitably to arrogance. So, because I'm proud, I'm going to go and do something stupid. And this has created some nasty epic fails. I'm going to start with a guy in one of the monasteries in Egypt in the late 300s. This guy is in the monastery for 50 years. Now, he tends to be a solitary. He's not down with the brothers a whole lot. But that's not that unusual at this time. Now, he has a little bit of a problem with pride because he's kind of rigid. In a monastic community, nobody fasts on Easter Sunday. I mean, it's an affront to God to fast on Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday is the biggest feast and festival of the Christian church. I mean, do we not want to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which gives us life? Which is the ultimate defeat of all of the powers of sin, death, and hell. Absolutely, we celebrate that. So the fasts are over on Easter Sunday. In fact, in the ancient church, they don't call this Easter. They call it the Feast of Feasts, like the Song of Songs. Well, this fellow shied away some from Easter because he was afraid of eating some lentils, which that would suggest he was getting soft in his discipline. It isn't good. Moderation is what characterized these monastics. Excess was not good. But he spends day and night imploring God, confessing his sins, working on being more and more and more and more Christ-like. And at the end of this 50-year time period, he's praying in his cell, and he sees a vision. This blinding light comes into his cell, and an angel appears to him and tells him how faithful he's been, and says, God is so pleased with you. Now, obviously, if God chooses to come and visit me with an angel, I'm not going to argue. In the process, though, the angel suggests, you're really special. Here's where your ears need to perk up. God doesn't play to your vanity. The scripture says he will give his angels charge over you so that you cannot dash your foot against a stone. Now, if you read the Gospels, Somebody else quotes that text in Matthew and Luke. But we'll set that aside. And the monk should have known this, but you know, Huron, if you go to the community well and you say that you're going to dive into the well, God's angels will grab you, prevent you from going down to the bottom of that well, and they'll carry you back, and you'll be a sign to the community of how God takes care of those who have been faithful to God. Well, Huron goes to the well and does a swan dive. And he finds out that the angel he's been talking to was not from God, because he doesn't have angels grabbing him. He hits the bottom. And since he's a solitary, nobody notices immediately that he's gone. Couple days later, somebody looks at his cell. He's not there. They go to draw water. There's somebody at the bottom of the well. So after hitting the bottom and spending 2 days in the water, they haul him up, and he is on the verge of death. And a day or so later, he's gone. Now, this is a guy who was faithful for 50 long years. But he didn't ask anybody whether this vision sounded kosher. He never saw that maybe his discernment might be suspect. Maybe since the last person to quote, "He will give his angels charge over you," was Satan trying to tempt Jesus. What gives you the right to think that if Jesus didn't take the devil up on this invitation, why should I? But he was proud. And his 50-year career ended in this catastrophe. And since he died because of something he did, he technically could have been treated as a suicide, which means he wouldn't have been given a proper Christian burial. But the abbot was a kindly man who said, well, was just deceived. So we'll believe he didn't intend to do this. The same writer tells a story of 2 monks who are insistent that they are really trying to radically follow God. And they have real serious faith in God. And they're going to show their faith by walking out into the desert to an adjoining city. And they're not bringing any food with them. And they're not bringing any water. Because they believe that God will provide for them. They believe they have been told to take this leap of faith because God will provide for them. And so they take a vow that they will only be supplied by the Lord on the way over to the new city. Well, they get a quarter way toward their goal, and the desert sun anywhere is brutal. It's brutal in Egypt. It was tough when I was there in December. Okay? I cannot imagine what it was like in June. So they are, by this point, out of their mind. Now, there is a group of migrant people in the desert, the Mazikes. These people are the ISIS. They are the MS-13 of the ancient Egyptian world. I mean, these aren't people who would kill you. These are people who thought it was fun to kill people. They thought it was a sport to hunt somebody down. I mean, these people are sick. So these people who would rather kill you than see you run across these two crazed monks. So when they see these guys, instead of saying, hey, let's have fun with these jerks, God puts on their hearts compassion. And so they, of all the crazy people in the world, grab water and food from their own stores and go out to these two people to rescue them from their own folly. One of the guys recognizes only God could have made these animals treat us like human beings. This must be God's work. The other one says, they don't look like God. That's not coming out of the sky. They're not angels. That's not God. I refuse to believe that's God. Well, needless to say, we know the story of the fool only because of the person who had discernment. So, epic fails happened in the ancient world when somebody wasn't wise enough to take advice from somebody else, be accountable to somebody else. It's the ancient world. We're better than that. We know better than that. Well, in 1985, I started as an assistant professor at a seminary a couple hours from here. I came in with a couple of other guys, and one of them came in to replace a fellow who had just left 2 months earlier to start his own independent ministry. The guy, the fellow who came in with me, one of the classes he had to teach was an apologetics class. And frankly, it terrified him. Not because he didn't know his stuff. He knew his stuff. The problem is that he was replacing this guy who was leaving named Ravi Zacharias. At the time, none of us knew that his Ravi Zacharias International Ministries would become genuinely, internationally, and known worldwide. But this was a small school, and it had kind of the feel of a small church or a small town. I mean, everybody knew everybody else's business. I heard people talk about Ravi for months after he left. And I never heard the slightest hint of any negative comment about the guy. I mean, the students loved him, the faculty loved him, the administration loved him. They thought he walked on water. And since I was in the same denomination as him, I had friends who read his books. I'm not an apologetics guy, so I don't follow that carefully. But I know any number of students of mine were helped by by tapes, by lectures, by books that he had written. And at points, I followed bits and pieces of his career because they showed up in different Christian magazines and stuff. And if I fast forward down to about 2018, 2019 or so, some questions about his ministry began to come up. And I know that the board that he was responsible to, didn't believe the charges, but they thought, well, we have to investigate this. I found out later that they had asked for his phone, and he gladly gave them the phone that the ministry provides for him. But he also had a personal phone for which they asked, and he said, "You don't need that. You know me." And the reason they knew him was because half the board was his family. The other half of the board were his close personal friends. So it was a board that had very, very little independence. I know a little bit about this because I'm on the board here. And we all know Charlie, but we're not all related to him. We don't rub noses with him every day. I mean, I live 800 miles away from here. I love him. I respect him. But whether I'm on the board here or not has no bearing on my life or independence or my ministry. So, I'm not tied in like that, and neither are a lot of the rest of us on the board. So the investigation shows no problems, and I don't know whether they made payouts or whatever, and some more problems came up later, and there was another investigation, and there were more credible claims, and fast forward to the couple months later when he found out that he was terminally ill, and he had to do what our next topic is. He had to live like he's dying, and he finally comes clean and says, "I've been involved in sexual immorality for years." I don't have to give you the details, but it wasn't pretty. And at some points, it's delusional. But no matter how godly you are, no matter how close to God you think you are, the human mind has an amazing ability to rationalize. And when you do not have people you are responsible to, when there is nobody who can say, "Look, this is getting too close to the edge. You got to pull back." But they can't do that because either they're related to you, they draw their paycheck from you, or they don't have permission to get into your life because you hide from them and you're purposely not accountable to them. This stuff happens because every person is like the meters or analytical instruments that I used to work with in laboratories and electronics facilities. No meter or instrument reads absolutely. Every one of them will get off calibration after some length of time. Every instrument has to be regularly calibrated to account for the fact that it drifts. If you don't calibrate the instrument, you can't rely on the results. If your behavior is not calibrated by the Word of God, it's not calibrated by the people around you who are also reading the Word of God and are not involved in your specific situation or don't have your particular problems and aren't liable to your rationalizations, well, that instrument drifts and drifts and drifts. It gets more and more inaccurate until you get to the point where you can justify, well, this sinful thing I'm doing is actually something I can thank God for. So these epic fails all happen when there isn't the kind of accountability, when people don't have the right to look into your life, when you don't share your life with people, and those people don't have the ability to say, "Hey man, it's failing the smell test." So don't let yourself get into the situation where nobody has the right to tell you you're drifting off course. Because better they tell you you're beginning to drift off course than you go back to them and say, man, I fell and I fell hard. Because that's not where you want to be.